Then Jesus said to the woman, "Your sins are forgiven." But those who were at table with him began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" And he said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Throughout elementary school, into middle school, I was known as a math whiz. There weren't many A's on my report card back then, but math, ace. And something happened the last quarter of the 8th grade. Math became a riddle. They did something. They turned all my numbers into letters. Computation became word problems. Now, Sherry, my wife, she loves riddles. She's a math queen. And when we go on trips, her bag has Sudoku. Are there Sudoku people here? Yeah, there's a few hands. God bless you. New York Times crossword puzzles, little book, Dell, she has them. And on top of it all, insult to injury, she goes for the worst kind of humor, puns. Yes, riddles. If you are a riddle geek, this message has something for you this morning. Now, riddles are in our literature. I mean, how many of you follow the Marvel literature called Batman? And one of the bad guys in Batman is the Riddler. Yes. And how many of you are familiar with The Hobbit? Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, there's Bilbo Baggins and Gollum having a riddle contest. Voiceless it cries, wingless flutters, toothless bites, mouthless mutters. Do you remember the answer? Say it. The wind. Yes. And the rest of us are scratching our heads. I know it. I'm one of the head scratchers. Then in the Goblet of Fire, J.K. Rowling gives her nod to riddles by putting one in the maze during the Twizzard tournament. And Harry is asked to crack the puzzle. First, think of the person who lives in disguise, who deals in secrets and tells not but lies. Next, tell me what always the last thing to mend, the middle of middle and the end of the end. And finally, give me the sound often heard during the search for a hard-to-find word. Now string them together and answer me this, which creature would you be unwilling to kiss? A spider. You have to read the book. Okay, riddles are ancient. I mean, for a long time, there's people out there who've been figuring these things out. And the oldest might be a Sumerian contribution to the legacy of logic puzzles discovered in the ancient civilization of Sumer. There is a house. One enters it blind and comes out seeing. There is a house. One enters it blind but comes out seeing. I'm going to put one person on the spot because he should know the answer. Keith? He's been retired too long. A schoolhouse. One enters it blind and comes out seeing. Well, table conversation in the Middle East often involved the sharing of riddles. It had two purposes. One, it was a polite way of exchanging wit and wisdom, letting the guest show off her or his brains, and letting the host do the same. Riddles were also a polite way of engaging in difficult conversation. Luke preserves for us the riddle passed between Simon the Pharisee and Jesus. The point being to engage both the onlooker and the reader to consider the relationship between forgiveness and love. As Luke tells the story, earlier that day, Jesus heard that John the Baptist had died, was killed. And Jesus posed the irony of it all. Here is John, the one who called every single person to repent, to recommit themselves to following God's law, and what? The Pharisees and other religious leaders did not like him, marginalized him. And on the other hand, here's Jesus, who associates with people that everyone considered the bad folk in town, and all those words we use to describe those of ill reputation, and they say, hey, how can he be a teacher of God's way when he associates with the drunkards and thieves of our county? Well, that night, Jesus is the guest of Simon, the Pharisee, head of the synagogue, leading man in town. And dinner parties in those days were held in the good weather out in the courtyard. Why? Well, so the rest of the town can see your party. You know, you have the Canes Festival or the Met Gala, and everyone shows up to watch the parade along the carpet and who's wearing what garb and everyone commenting and applauding. Well, that's what happened. The town showed up, and on the low wall around the courtyard, they'd line up to watch the dinner party with this leading man in town and the guest, Jesus. Well, social convention was being followed until this one woman did what you're not supposed to do, breaking the line, going beyond the rope, going over the wall. And worst of all, she was the woman everyone talked about. She was crying, carrying on, coming to Jesus and rubbing his feet, letting her hair down, wiping it. Now, let me clue you in on something. Rubbing a man's feet was a gesture of foreplay in that day and age. Something you did not do in public. Letting your hair down, a woman would never do in public. The gasp was audible. And Simon posed for himself the riddle. A prophet would know what kind of woman this is. And a person who would know what kind of woman this is would never allow this behavior to take place. Therefore, Jesus is not a prophet. Because certainly a man of God would not let this kind of person get close to him. Obviously, a pretender. One Sunday morning in early spring, a visitor at early worship did the unthinkable. As I came out to lead confession and absolution, the man with deep, dark brown skin and a big old brown black mustache and dark black hair came to the middle of the aisle and prostrated himself on the floor. And then after confession, he came up to me, reeking of body odor and tobacco smoke and alcohol, telling me in broken English that his name was Matthew. And as he was walking in front of the church this morning, he saw the name St. Matthew, and he heard the voice of God calling him to come into church, because he was supposed to receive the Lord's Supper this day. Well, the ushers were ready to escort him outside of the sanctuary. Instead, I found a pew where no one else was seated, unoccupied. And there he sat, probably not understanding most of the service in English. And at the time of the communion celebration came forward and, according to his Roman Catholic upbringing, opened his mouth to receive the host. Crossed himself, walked into the chancel raising his arms and saying a prayer in Spanish. And at the end of the service, thanked me and assured me he loved Jesus and his mother. The question, before the house, did he belong? Most likely, Matthew was an undocumented person who worked either in harvesting vegetables or in one of the many construction sites around Charleston. Did God speak to him? Did he belong among the more refined? And how do we receive the marginalized, the shabby, the person who smells or wears a bad reputation? Well, the appalled Simon knew the answer to those questions. The woman affronted his honor, and that is why he posed that riddle. That first, if Jesus knew who this woman was, he was a prophet. But no prophet would allow such a woman to touch him. So therefore, Jesus either didn't know or else he didn't care. And in either case, he's not a prophet. So Jesus posed his riddle. There's this worker. He owes 50 days' wages, minimum wage, $3,400. And there's this other worker who owes 10 times that much. And the man who has the paper tears it to shreds, tosses it away. Now, Simon, the riddle goes, who would have the most thankfulness? Well, the question seemed so obvious that when Simon finally answered, it had the tone of voice of duh. The man who received the greater debt forgiven. And so Jesus points out the graciousness of this woman in expressing thanks and the little kind of welcome Simon gave. And then Jesus said, those who have been forgiven much love much. And those who have been forgiven little love little. Now, is Jesus saying that, well, Simon really didn't have a chance to do a lot of loving because the man didn't need much forgiveness? Well, that's what Simon thought. And that was the problem. He didn't see himself like the woman, like the person who needed forgiveness. In his pious and righteous self-depiction, he had no idea what it meant to be forgiven and no awareness of his own need. He loved little because he excluded himself from experiencing God's love. It seems to me from the story, I miss the point if I don't see myself like Simon, quick to judge others, reticent to acknowledge my own need of forgiveness, remaining blind and ignorant. And my ability to get to love gets squeezed out by the need to keep up this facade that I got it all together. So does love lead to forgiveness? Or the ability to love the result of being forgiven? Both. It depends on the perspective. Jesus accepts the woman's expression of love as a sign that she has been forgiven much. Love is the natural response of forgiveness, and the capacity to love is directly related to the ability to receive grace, forgiveness, and love. When you and I receive God's love, we want to extend the same, roll up our sleeves, and join our hands with God's mission in the world. By receiving forgiveness, we grow in the capacity to love. And growing in the capacity to love, we become even more aware of our need of forgiveness. Simon is left to ponder what happened. The woman, on the other hand, gets changed by an experience of God's grace. And like her, anyone who hears and receives the gospel, the story of cross and open tomb, the declaration in Christ's name you are forgiven, can never get over the fact you are set free. Shame, guilt, cast away because you are forgiven. God's love becomes the controlling force in your lives. This is what I would like you to do today. During the time of getting ready for confession or getting ready for communion, I'd like you to be thinking about, what is it that I'm still hanging on to? What is it that's so difficult to let go to God? Where I need forgiveness? You're going to be given a card when you come up for communion. And this is what I'd like you to do. Tear it in half. And drop one half in the trash can as a sign that you're over with, you're forgiven. And keep the other half as a reminder this week. I, like the woman, have been forgiven, and I'm set free to love much. This is a beautiful story of what forgiveness looks and feels like. Amen.